Hi guys, welcome back to my channel for a discussion of The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. So I love Middlemarch. It's one of my all-time favorite novels, but I've discovered it pretty recently in the last few years, and I haven't read any other Eliot before, so it's kind of about time. I didn't go in with a lot of prior knowledge about this book besides knowing that it was a bit controversial in its time morally, given its depiction of the heroine Maggie nearly falling in the Christian sense. I did find a little familiarity that was unexpected. In Greta Gerwig's Little Women movie, Jo is reading this book to Beth in the scene on the beach, which I did not know, but when I got to that part in this book, I recognized the passage pretty immediately. The thing about we could never love the earth so well if we had no childhood in it. A really beautiful passage, a great one to pick for that movie. And just a good example of how strikingly this book writes about the emotions of childhood. The story itself is quite different from Middlemarch. We're following Tom and Maggie Tulliver, a brother and sister. We're with them from their childhood to adulthood, the kind of harsh realities that life is dealing them, their conflicting personalities, the ways they seem kind of fated to thwart each other's happiness. Before we get in too deep, I should say, if you don't want to know how this book ends, particularly like the very end, the last few pages, this is probably not the video for you. I'm really going in depth on the themes, and the ending is thematically very important to what this book is saying, so I can't really exclude it. So let's start there, just with the idea that this book does not have a happy ending. It is a tragedy, and not just a tragedy, but it has all of the kind of grandness and the ideas of fate that you would see in a Greek tragedy or a Shakespearean tragedy, which Eliot makes explicit allusion to in the text. We also see her narrative voice actively advocating for writing in this way about ordinary people whose stories may be otherwise forgotten. You know, this book builds a lot of sympathy for people who might be periphery characters in a grander tale like that. For instance, Mr. Tulliver, who you could easily see being like a comedic background character in another kind of story, we get to see in great and painful detail his demise, and also just a brilliant character study that shows us why it's so inevitable that he comes to this point. For Mr. Tulliver was in a position neither new nor striking, but, like other everyday things, sure to have a cumulative effect that will be felt in the long run. He was held to be a much more substantial man than he really was, and as we are all apt to believe what the world believes about us, it was his habit to think of failure and ruin with the same sort of remote pity with which a spare, long-necked man hears that his plethoric, short-necked neighbor is stricken with apoplexy. So we see Mr. Tulliver feels that ruin is something that happens to other people, not to him, despite the reality of his finances. And we see a kind of stubbornness, a chasing after pride that drives him into all of these law disputes that are rushing him to ruin. And, you know, this lawyer, Mr. Wakeham, is kind of capitalizing on this man who seems unaware that he's ruining himself. So, you know, the consequences of this are really bad, really difficult for his children to deal with. And Mr. Tulliver is certainly blamable for that. And often his kind of rageful pride can be kind of comedic, but he's not only that. It's also like horribly sad to see him flying down this slope before he realizes that he's falling. And we see that he's just someone who's uneducated and unprepared for the way the world is changing. He is not built to match it. He's not equipped to protect his daughter despite his real true affection for Maggie. It's kind of the tragedy of it is that we see him through his children's eyes who love and respect him. And we see all the good tenderness in him that maybe Mr. Wakeham is unaware of. So we're seeing kind of every indignity Mr. Tulliver has to suffer, falling more and more under the control of Wakeham. And we have one of these allusions from Eliot. Mr. Tulliver had a destiny as well as Oedipus, and in this case he might plead, like Oedipus, that his deed was inflicted on him rather than committed by him. So, much of this is of his own making, but the additional insult added to the injury, that is Wakeham. It seems being subjected to Wakeham is his destiny. It's kind of the central force in the plotline of Mr. Tulliver's life. It's his destiny to take on this indignity and pass on these hard emotions to his children, who as a result are kind of forced to grow up a little bit too early and be exposed to a lot of harsh realities in the actual labor it takes for them to be self-sufficient, in the awareness of how few people are actually willing to help them. And they're exposed to trying to figure out moral questions with no one really to guide them. Another one of the tragedy allusions that Eliot makes is Hamlet. And she's talking about how Maggie, we see, has a kind of impulsive, passionate nature, which certainly makes her vulnerable to what happens in this story, but that it's not only within herself that these things happen. The circumstances of her life made all of this possible. So she's talking about the concept of character is destiny, but not the whole of our destiny. Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, was speculative and irresolute, and we have a great tragedy in consequence. But if his father had lived to a good old age, and his uncle had died an earthly death, we can conceive Hamlet's having married Ophelia and got through life with a reputation of sanity, notwithstanding many soliloquies and some moody sarcasms towards the fair daughter of Polonius, to say nothing of the frankest incivility to his father-in-law. Also shows a little bit of the humor that Eliot brings in. So, we're seeing that the combination of who Maggie is and the circumstances of her life are making her destiny and her outcomes kind of inevitable. It's that passion in her, but it's also the fact that she could never finish her education, that she has very little access to the things in life that could make her fulfilled and happy, that she doesn't have anyone to accept her kind of excess of affection. Any material change in one of these areas could have saved her, but we see over and over again that not happening. Every victory is followed by heartbreak. Every reconciliation is followed by another rift. Every moment of her life is bringing her to the end with Tom in the boat. But it's significant and very explicit in the text that it's important to tell the stories of people like this, like Tom and Maggie, who might otherwise be forgotten in the flood of time. These kind of small people with small stories, this wasted and unrealized potential. People like Tom and Maggie and Mr. Tulliver, they have destinies too. So let's take some time now and talk about childhood and the end of childhood. To start, the beginning section of this book is such a beautiful, sweet, often funny depiction of childhood. There's just so much stunning writing on how a child sees and experiences the world. There's so much beauty about nostalgia, how it feels to look back on those times. Like, this feels like one of the great childhood books to me. It's kind of crazy looking back on reading that section now, like knowing what happens in the second half of the book and how grim things become. But I think that very clear contrast between childhood and it very suddenly and cruelly ending is kind of the point. Let me give one example of the kind of language that I'm talking about, different from the one that is in Little Women, but thematically similar. But heaven knows where that striving might lead us, if our affections had not a trick of twining round those old inferior things. If the loves and sanctities of our life had no deep immovable roots in memory. One's delight in an elderberry bush overhanging the confused leafage of a hedgerow bank as a more gladdening sight than the finest cistus or fuchsia spreading itself on the softest undulating turf is an entirely unjustifiable preference to a landscape gardener or to any of those severely regulated minds who are free from the weakness of any attachment that does not rest on a demonstrable superiority of qualities. And there is no better reason for preferring this elderberry bush than that it stirs an early memory, that it is no novelty in my life, speaking to me merely through my present sensibilities to form and color, but the long companion of my existence that wove itself into my joys when joys were vivid. Isn't that just amazing, this idea that if we only cared about quality, we would all kind of have the same opinions, but some things stir that memory, that feeling of when we could feel joy the most purely in childhood. I just can't get over how much I love Eliot's writing. And there's so much about how Maggie feels things so strongly. That's like one of the inherent things in her personality, but she's at an age where she doesn't have the life experience to know that, you know, every little disagreement isn't the end of the world, because to her it feels like it is. You know, to see her unawareness that things pass, to see the kind of full body joy she feels when she gets affection from Tom or her father. It's such a beautiful depiction of childhood. So when it ends, when Mr. Tulliver loses everything and they're kind of thrown out into the world, you feel its loss so much more deeply because you have spent time living in this beautiful childhood that Tom and Maggie have had. Eliot uses the language of exiting Eden to describe this end of childhood. It's a complete exit, never to return. Life for Tom and Maggie is mostly toil and hardship from here on out. And without the kind of rosy shelter of that childhood, they begin to see the adults in their life as they are, as real flawed people, most painfully with their beloved and respected father, Tom in particular. It was really hard to see how their father has been wrong, how the education he was so confident in for Tom is not useful to him now when he needs it, how his stubbornness and kind of playing at the law in a game that he's not equipped to play led to them losing everything. Even though Tom struggles to see how some of those traits in his father are reflected in himself too, that really strong pride. Maggie's struggle is much more about holding on to what is good in her father and remembering him for those things and not the way people talk about him after. We see her father give her comforting words and physical affection in this moment where she is very emotional and having one of like the major trials of childhood. Delicious words of tenderness. Maggie never forgot any of these moments when her father took her part. She kept them in her heart and thought of them long years after, when everyone else said that her father had done very ill by his children. So she's really keeping her love for him alive, and we're seeing these little things, these little moments of comfort and affection might seem small, but they were a huge deal to Maggie. They meant so much to her that they are kind of burned in her brain forever. You know, it's not in Maggie's nature to blame, which is not really the case for Tom. So she doesn't blame her father for everything that happened, despite what the world thinks and everything that she has been thrust into. So I want to also talk a bit about what Eliot is saying about women and their place in the world through the character of Maggie, seeing how much potential is wasted in Maggie because she's a girl, seeing the kind of harsh realities that she faces as a woman. I think one way we see this early on is in the idea of Tom's education. Mr. Tulliver wants Tom to be educated, but not having an education himself, he doesn't really know what that looks like or what he should be seeking out for Tom. And it just doesn't really suit Tom's interests. He really just wants to take over the mill and do what his father has done. So instead of doing anything practical, like learning about business and trade, things that might help Tom be financially successful, Mr. Tulliver pays to give Tom essentially a gentleman's education. He's learning like Latin, like the things that somebody would need to go on to a higher education, which is not the case for Tom. He's not particularly good at it, and it has no practical applications in his life. It's kind of a waste for Tom, besides just polishing him a bit, which is sad because you really see Mr. Tulliver clinging to that as evidence that he didn't do everything wrong for his kids. He gave Tom an education, but he doesn't know how ill-suited that education was. But what makes this extra upsetting and ironic is that as ill-suited as this kind of education was for Tom, it was exactly right for Maggie and her active mind to answer its needs. But it was not an option for her as a girl. She craves art and music, literature, knowledge. She's like this dry sponge just begging for water. And I think if any of those needs had been adequately met in her, it would have tempered that kind of impulsiveness in her. It would have avoided what happens in the latter part of this book. Then we see another difference for men and women. After everything happens, Tom jumps into action. He gets a job. He starts contributing financially to his family. He is actively working to pay off his father's debts to restore the family honor. But Maggie, she doesn't have that option of agency, of taking action. It's very frustrating for her because she wants to do that. She wants to help her family. But as a woman, she has nothing to do. All she can do is cling as a dependent to Tom. So that's kind of what she latches onto, just trying to not be dependent. That's the least she feels she can do, not increasing the burden with her own upkeep. We see this over and over again. This is a constant theme with Maggie. She has so much to give: love, intelligence, energy, and just no outlet to express it, nowhere to put it. So, of course, this person who is so full of so much is going to burst at the slightest touch. And we can't, in the same vein, judge the Dodson sisters quite so harshly, though they are often very comedic in this book. What else do these women have to do but obsess over their linens? There's nowhere else for them to put their minds. And though we, as the readers, know how much substance Maggie really has, that doesn't matter to the vast majority of people in her world. We see Philip Wakem, one of the few people who really sees Maggie for all the good that she is, talking to his father about her and kind of talking about how good she is. And his father says, "We don't ask what a woman does. We ask whom she belongs to." Maggie agrees with Tom very little. She's constantly being punished by him. She doesn't have the rigidity and the pride that her father and Tom share, but she belongs to them and answers for whatever their opinions are. Tom is the hero of his family, and Maggie is obligated to stand behind him and be seen as an extension of him. So Maggie, kind of having her head turned by her first love, running away with Stephen, kind of doing this impulsive thing that ruins her. It's not really a surprise when we see the summation of her life. Every step of her world has left her very fragile and kind of desperate for any kind of comfort and affection she can find. She's somebody not living a full life, kind of thirsting to death, and he's offering her water. Maggie was a creature full of eager, passionate longings for all that was beautiful and glad, thirsty for all knowledge, with an ear straining after dreamy music that died away and would not come near to her, with a blind, unconscious yearning for something that would link together the wonderful impressions of this mysterious life and give her soul a sense of home in it. No wonder, when there is a contrast between the outward and the inward, that painful collisions come of it. She wants so much, and she's known just enough of the good things in life to know what she's missing by not having it now. She's so passionate, and she has these unused wells in her for education and art, but also for love. Tom will not accept her love and her affection, and he forbids her from giving it to Philip, who, because of their childhood connection, feels like a natural brother to her. But because of the conflict between their fathers. It is absolutely not okay with Tom. We just see that after she loses her father, that one person who kind of took her side, and she's not allowed to see Philip, she's just desperately lonely. So there's this part after she meets Stephen Guest where they have this kind of connection, this chemistry that's kind of unsaid. There's clearly an attraction there. Such things could have had no perceptible effect on a thoroughly well-educated young lady with a perfectly balanced mind who had all the advantages of fortune, training, and refined society. But if Maggie had been that young lady, you would probably have known nothing about her. Her life would have had so few vicissitudes that it could hardly have been written. For the happiest women, like the happiest nations, have no history. Maggie does have a history, a rather painful and tumultuous one, and she's had no education, no comfort to kind of temper the high-strung feelings within her. There's been nothing to keep that in check. So it's not necessarily that Stephen is her soulmate. It's not really like that. He is a first love and a real love, but it's just more that she's unprepared for it, and she's been so kind of starved for love that she can't keep those feelings in balance. And it's not just love that Stephen offers. He is a wealthy young man of consequence. He would give her access to a world of art and music and all the books she could ever want, and ease. Her life has been so not easy. It's tempting. It's more than tempting. It's entrancing. And there is a time where she gives over to Stephen's will and Stephen's love for her fully. She gives up her agency to him because it's so alluring. She does change course before it goes too far for herself and her own moral compass. But Eliot has illustrated this love so beautifully that I think we really feel the pain with Maggie of what it is to give this up, to give Stephen up. She has such despair in denying him. She says to her aunt, "I wish I could have died when I was 15. It seemed so easy to give things up then. It is so hard now." You know, when she leaves Stephen, she is walking back to a life of no comfort, where she will be the one who is judged most harshly, where everybody will believe the worst things about her, in spite of what is the truth, which is that Stephen had a lot more agency in their decision to run away. Maggie is a portrait of someone whose inherent kind of soul needs are not answered, and what that vacuum leads to. So we have this kind of essential moral dilemma between Stephen and Maggie, which this is really central to why this was a controversial story in its time. You know, the heroine very nearly loses her honor, and she does lose her honor in reputation, if not in fact. And Eliot kind of refuses to give us a very clear right or wrong in this scenario. She leaves it ambiguous, kind of saying that there are no easy answers in doing the right thing, which is an unpopular idea for moralists of the time. When Stephen and Maggie meet, they're both kind of entangled with other people, Lucy and Philip, though neither has an outright engagement. And we see both Maggie and Stephen really trying to resist this kind of natural pull they're feeling towards each other. But despite that, they do genuinely fall in love in a way that's like so beautifully written that I think as a reader you find yourself rooting for them despite the obstacles. To give an example of kind of the way this romance is written between them, there's this part where they're alone for maybe the first time. They've avoided being alone very much. And they walked unsteadily on without feeling that they were walking, without feeling anything but that long, grave, mutual gaze, which has the solemnity belonging to a deep human passion. The hovering thought that they must and would renounce each other made this moment of mute confession more intense in its rapture. So it's this moment where, without even saying it, they both acknowledge with a look how they feel about each other for the first time. It's so beautiful, and it definitely makes you think, this love and happiness they feel together, how can that be wrong? And how can it be wrong for the long-suffering Maggie to finally get her own piece of happiness? To not dedicate her life in self-sacrifice to Tom or to Philip's happiness, but to seek out her own. Kind of her moment of greatest weakness when Stephen's saying all of these things about how they can live their life together and he can make her happy and they can belong to each other. To poor Maggie, they were very near. They were like nectar held close to thirsty lips. There must be then a life for mortals here below, which was not hard and chill, in which affection would no longer be self-sacrifice, which is just so totally heartbreaking. Despite all of these feelings, it is wrong for Maggie. She can't cross this line when it really comes to it. For her, it is impossible to consider kind of profiting from Lucy and Philip's pain in what has happened between Maggie and Stephen. Her happiness would be tainted by that forever. So we see Stephen and Maggie very explicitly having this argument, arguing their different viewpoints on what is the right thing to do. Stephen's argument is that it is more harmful and dishonest to stay with these people when they love another, that they're kind of cursing them to a half-life when maybe they could find a real passion somewhere else. That the love that Maggie and Stephen share voids all previous claims. And also he argues at this point they have already run away together. It would be a worse thing to not go ahead and get married. They've already hurt Lucy and Philip. So they might as well make the best of it. Which is not just Stephen's view, but also the view of the town. If Maggie returns as Stephen's wife, they can kind of sweep things under the rug and clean it up. It's a matter of gossip, but not necessarily excommunication. But Maggie, she's made mistakes before, and she knows what it's like to live with regret, to live with that inner turmoil when she has hurt someone. So she's trying desperately to stick to her moral code, to choose a clear conscience over love, to give up love forever, as it seems to Maggie at this age. She doesn't want to be ruled by her emotions and to have a happy life at the cost of other people that she cares about. She chooses a life of exile and atonement when she returns to town without marrying Stephen, which in his eyes is just her wasting herself. And frankly, in my eyes too, I wanted Maggie to choose herself, but then she wouldn't be Maggie, right? Eliot does not resolve this disagreement with Stephen and Maggie, which is kind of the point. There are no easy answers. Morality is much more complicated than those who police it would have you believe. Both Stephen and Maggie have valid arguments here, And because of the way the book ends, we don't really see how Maggie's decision plays out. It's not necessarily proven to be the right decision. We can't know which path would have caused the least emotional destruction. So one thing we see in Maggie is that she always has good intentions and she always regrets deeply when she's done wrong, which is a kind of purity in her that is one of the really kind of beautiful things about Maggie. But it's also something that causes a lot of emotional torment within herself that the other characters are not dealing with. We see this from like the small childhood kind of sins all the way up to running away with Stephen. But with her brother Tom, it's not about what she's actually done or what her intention was in doing it. It's the degree of which he will punish her, which brings up the question in this book of what right does another flawed human have to punish you? Tom is not a villain, this is his story too. We see his stubbornness and rigidity and his sense of justice, how that's kind of part of him from his childhood, how it's bolstered by everything that happens with his father. We see what makes Tom into the man he becomes. And we see how difficult it is for him too, the way that his personality clashes with the kind of flightiness, as he sees it, of Maggie's. The book is ultimately on Maggie's side, but we are not in any way without sympathy for Tom, who does do a lot of good for his family. And Maggie does kind of wreck his plans and spoil his happiness a lot of the time. There's something established very early about kind of the difference between Tom and Maggie, thinking about how Tom kind of looks back on his past actions. But if Tom had told his strongest feeling at that moment, he would have said, "I'd do just the same again." That was his usual mode of viewing his past actions, whereas Maggie was always wishing she had done something different. Maggie has this turmoil that Tom doesn't have, because Tom really does believe that he is right, or that even if he's not totally right, there's nothing he could have changed. He feels himself to be very intentional. So when he looks at Maggie's actions, he reads intention into them. He takes the harshest view of all of her mistakes, that she's choosing to do evil. So when she runs away with Stephen, he takes it as she was intentionally hurting her cousin Lucy, that she went out of her way to take Stephen from her. Tom is himself very strong-willed and self-assured, and so he can't understand Maggie's moments of weakness or kind of running away with her emotions. He doesn't know what it is to regret the way that Maggie does. And Tom's natural harshness is really magnified by the toil of his life. He has had really great weights laid upon him by his father as now the man of the house. He has to pay off the debts and restore his family's honor. He has to regain control of the mill that has been in his family for generations. And his father even makes him swear to exact revenge on the Wakems. Like, he literally passes down his worst prejudice and rigidity. And Tom, with his own family pride, he holds true to all of these things that he has promised in the name of his father's honor. We see he never forgives Philip for the sins of his father. He has inherited this tendency for grudges, but without the tenderness that Mr. Tulliver had for Maggie in particular. And in this part, Maggie kind of gets to the heart of it. I know I've been wrong, often continually, but yet sometimes when I have done wrong, it has been because I have feelings that you would be the better for if you had them. If you were in fault ever, if you had done anything very wrong, I should be sorry for the pain it brought you. I should not want punishment to be heaped on you. But you have always enjoyed punishing me. You have always been hard and cruel to me, even when I was a little girl, and always loved you better than anyone else in the world. You would let me go crying to bed without forgiving me. You have no pity. You have no sense of your own imperfection and your own sins. It is a sin to be hard. It is not fitting for a mortal, for a Christian. She's kind of rarely this direct with Tom, but Maggie already suffers greatly for her mistakes. She is fully and painfully aware of them, and it just is unnecessary, the torment that he puts on top of that. Tom is flawed as well, but no matter what mistakes he made, it's very clear that Maggie would remain loyal and affectionate to him. And the book definitely sides with her on this issue of kind of the sin of hardness. Without even hearing her side of the story, when Maggie comes back after running away with Stephen, he very publicly rejects her and throws her out of his home. He disowns her completely as a sister. And he faces judgment and rebuke for this, for being disloyal to his family. And we see him in a way that Maggie doesn't get to see him, kind of suffering for his coldness, because without Maggie being a part of it, he can't really feel any of the joy of his victories. He doesn't feel happy when he gets the mill back. You know, without Maggie, he doesn't have kind of that light at the end of his labor, even if he's not consciously aware himself of how her absence is affecting him. So we see this book really clearly siding with sympathy and affection over punishment and justice. We see this with Mr. Tulliver and Maggie when she is a child, when she's kind of at the peaks of her childhood despair and she knows her mother and Tom only have unkind words for her. Her father offers her love and pity, and it's so exactly what she needs. It's so welcome in her heart that those moments become the core memories of her father. They deepen her love for him and they increase her desire to be good for him. It means so much to her, these little affections, and you're just thinking throughout the book, if Tom only knew how far a little bit of affection from him would go with Maggie, would go with controlling the parts of her that he doesn't like, how different the story could have been. And at that kind of moment of confrontation, when Tom refuses to let Maggie into his home, their mother, Mrs. Tulliver, also shows Maggie a kind of very moving, sympathetic loyalty. A moment that I think really heals a childhood where they were often at odds. Slowly, Maggie was turning away with despair in her heart, but the poor frightened mother's love leaped out now, stronger than all dread. My child, I'll go with you. You've got a mother. Oh, the sweet rest of that embrace to the heart-stricken Maggie. More helpful than all wisdom is one draught of simple human pity that will not forsake us. Historically, her mother has always taken Tom's side, so this is all the more significant and further evidence of how wrongly Tom is behaving. This capacity for sympathy is Maggie's greatest strength, and she has the strength because she has made mistakes, because she knows what it is to err. When she comes back, and she kind of goes to the refuge of their very sweet childhood friend, Bob. Bob kind of asks her if she wants him to rough Stephen up for what happened, and Maggie says, "But I shouldn't like to punish anyone, even if they'd done me wrong. I've done wrong myself too often." She doesn't want to punish people. She doesn't care about justice. And she's just this example of you can only accept and forgive the flaws in others if you know the flaws in yourself, which is something that's hard for Tom to understand. He doesn't have this regretful nature, and on paper, he's really done everything right. He has saved his family from the brink, and his coldness to Maggie is him enacting justice on her in his mind. But what is justice between two people who love each other? Who has the authority to exact it? What does justice change or fix? So deeply inherent is it in this life of ours that men have to suffer for each other's sins. So inevitably diffusive is human suffering that even justice makes its victims, and we can conceive no retribution that does not spread beyond its mark in pulsations of unmerited pain. Justice has its victims too, and to seek it is causing unnecessary suffering. So, for all the romance, all the time spent with Stephen and Philip, this book is not really about that. It's not about who Maggie and Tom are going to marry. What happens to Philip and Stephen and Lucy after this book has ended is not of key importance. It's about Tom and Maggie and their relationship. And we see they start with this pure childhood love for each other. There's this one part that I loved so much about Maggie going fishing with Tom when he's home from school, and how she can't catch anything. She's not good at fishing at all, but it's one of her favorite times because she just gets to be quiet with her older brother, who she loves and admires so much. They have that connection that they're moving away from as they get older and just struggling to get back to in their kind of constant clashes with each other. We see this cycle over and over again of them hurting each other, of Maggie making some careless mistake, of Tom punishing her, them reconciling when they are sharing kind of the burden of their difficult life together, those moments of closeness, and then, falling apart again at the next conflict. The incident with Stephen is less about what happens itself, but about it being kind of a big enough mistake to wrench them apart completely. It's so extreme and something that Tom cannot forgive, even though we can see kind of the degree of innocence that Maggie has in all of this. It's pushing this strained sibling dynamic kind of as far as it can go. And in that state of greatest strain, that's when Maggie shows her nearly supernatural strength of her love and her acceptance of Tom despite everything. We can see how quickly she can forget all that has happened when disaster comes in the form of this flood, like an actual biblical flood. When her first thought is not Stephen or Philip, her first thought is Tom and getting to Tom. And then that's the moment when they make peace with each other. When they've lost everything, they've been working for, all the things they've been clinging to, they're reborn together as a reflection of their childhood selves. Tom using that childhood nickname for her, loving each other as a brother and sister should, and dying together. This story is not about getting the mill back. It's not about Maggie's romances. It's about Maggie and Tom coming back to each other despite their differences. You know, the world wasted these two young people. That is true. But I think the real tragedy of this ending is that they don't find this true peace with each other until their final moments. You know, maybe they had stuck together as a team kind of against the world that showed them no kindness, the outcome would have been very different. So there's definitely some very real pain being reflected in this story, looking at George Eliot's own life. She herself had a brother that disowned her because of her not conventional romantic situation, living with a man who's technically married. So, you know, there's some possible wish fulfillment for Eliot in that final reconciliation between sister and brother. But really, it just makes kind of the emotional reality of Maggie's longing to be on good terms with Tom very raw, very moving. I find Eliot just astounding in her characterization, in her prose, in like her narratorial sympathy for the people that populate her stories. She doesn't judge them in their mistakes either. Very excited to discover some more from Eliot's works. Yeah, of course, can't recommend this book or George Eliot in general enough. Hey, this was a long one. I had a lot to say about this book. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.